Hello and welcome to beginner's tutorial for rigging the body. This is Maya 2017. This model here is provided by Dallin Blankenship, who modeled this. This is a Tesla model, is the name of it. And in the next set of tutorials, we're going to be going over just a real basic setup for a character. We're going to be placing joints, and then we'll be setting up controls, and we'll be setting up things like a reverse foot and an IKFK arm setup, and just a real general overlook at blend shapes and creating those with the shape editor for some facial blend shapes. Yeah, so this is the model. The first thing you want to take a look at when you have your model is where your edge loops are, and make sure you have the right type of edge loops. Make sure your history is deleted, your model's cleaned up, there's no other junk or garbage in the scene. So we want to make sure we select our model here, and we want to delete our history. So I have a lot of these set up as buttons on my shelf here, but if you don't have those buttons, no need to worry. All you have to do to make a button is you select Control and Shift, and then you go to where that button is. So for history, it's under Edit, Delete by Type, History, or Alt-Shift-D. And so if you select Control, Shift, and go down to Edit, Delete by Type, History, and you'll middle mouse click, it creates a button over here on your shelf. You can do that with any of the menus here in Maya, so it's really, really super handy, so you don't have to click and find these things all the time. So I already have one of those, so I'm just going to delete this like that. Okay, so yeah, we selected our model, we've deleted history, and we want to make sure that our model is in a nice T-pose. So like Tesla is here, and that we have enough geometry to make good deformation when it comes time to bending and moving the character. So we've got some really good geometry here. Places we want to check and make sure that we've got enough edge loops are around all of our joints, basically. So our elbow, our wrist, our shoulders, neck, knees, ankles, and having some edge loops in the feet there for like the ball of our foot. So yeah, it's nice to have your geometry nice and evenly spaced as well as you can. You know, no model is going to be absolutely perfect, but we try to get it as close as we possibly can. And if you haven't modeled it and there's issues, the character isn't in a T-pose, the legs aren't quite lined up, talk to your modeler and see if they can make those adjustments for you so that you have a nice clean model to work from. So the Tesla model here has several props and armor here. We're just going to turn those off, and we're just going to be focusing on the body. So we've gone through, we've checked everything, make sure that we have nice edge loops, enough edge loops around the mouth, around the eyes, and in the face, so that we can get really good deformation happening throughout. So once we're really happy with that, we've cleaned it up, and we know everything is how we want it, the first thing that we're going to be doing is setting up our joints, right, and looking at our joint placement. So joints are kind of a unique object here. So up in your rigging shelf, you have a joint tool, which you can also find underneath the rigging tab. If you're an older version of Maya, that would be found under your animation tab. And then you have your skeleton, and you have your create joints tool. So, which is this button here on our rigging shelf. So The interesting thing about with Maya that is important to note is that most objects and most things that you're working with have two nodes. They have a shape node and a transform node. So the transform node, if you come over and you look in your channel box here, it shows you all the transforms. You translate X, Y, and Z, rotate X, Y, and Z, and your scale X, Y, and Z along with your visibility. These are all part of your transform, how it's moving and being manipulated. However, if you were to come over into your outliner, you were to look at the Tesla body, if you right-click, there's an option to show shapes. Usually this is turned off. So you can turn them off like that, and then you would just see basically the transform node. So if you turn shapes back on, you can see here's our transform, and this is the shape node, which is the actual kind of geometry. So the interesting thing that joints are kind of unique in is the fact that they do not have a shape node at all. So if I were to go and I create a joint or a few joints and hit enter there, and I have my shapes on, you'll see there are no shapes. And so this is good to know because you can manipulate joints differently than you can another object, so to get good placement and things like that. So it's just one of the unique things about joints. There is a way that you can actually attach like an Erb's curve or a polygon as the shape node of our joint, but that's not something we're really going to be dealing with or messing with at this time. So, okay. So when we go through, we generally want to make sure that our joints are being placed in pretty logical places, in the same places, in the same joint structure that we have in our body. We want to basically mimic. Probably not 100%, but it's a really good guideline for what we want, right? So, of course, we want to hit somewhere in the shoulder here for a good pivot point for our shoulder. Make sure our elbow is right in the right spot, our wrist, so on and so forth. So the first thing that we're going to do, and we're going to be working with a lot of our orthographic views. So these guys right here. And something that I like to always have on whenever I'm rigging is to make sure that I am showing my wireframe on my model, which is just this button right up here in your viewport window here. So, and that's available in all of them, but it's just really nice because it lets you see where your geometry is, where your edge loops are while you're placing your joints. And so if we were to go in and we were to take our create joint tool and we started placing joints on our model and going, oh, we need a root joint or our center of gravity joint right here in the belly, right? When we're in our perspective view and we use the joint tool, it doesn't really know where to place it. So even though I'm thinking, oh yeah, it's right here in the belly button, where it's actually being placed is way back here, because Maya doesn't know where in space you're trying to place it. So it's automatically just going to put it on the ground plane at wherever you've clicked. So that's why we're going to be using orthographic views. So we're going to go in, we're going to come to our side view, and we'll be switching back and forth. So we've got our joint tool here set up. And I'm going to actually change this to wireframe by pressing 4. And I'm going to come in here, and I generally want my joints in the middle of my mesh, of my model here, because I get really good deformation on the back and the front. So if I have a joint placed way back here, you won't get a whole lot of movement when you rotate your joint and your mesh is bound to this joint. You won't get a whole lot of movement on these vertices back here But a little bit of rotation on this joint is going to make a big influence over here because it's so much further out and away from where the joint is, from where it's pivoting at. So generally, yeah, what we want to start with is just our root joint. This is our center of gravity, and basically kind of where everything is derived from. So I'm going to say it's going to be right about here, just above the hips. Right here. Okay, and then I really want my joints, these joints in the spine, I want to set them up to have a world orientation. So if I were to hit my Y key, this is a soft enter, so it completes the action of my tool without exiting the tool, like if I were to hit enter. So to hit Y, I've created this joint, and it is placed there. And then if you hit Q and you look at that joint and go to your rotation tool there, you'll notice it's got rotate X going forward, rotate Y right here, and my rotate Z going side to side. Okay. And it has placed my joint off to the side. So I'm just going to move it. I don't want anywhere on translate X. And then this is what world orientation looks like. X is forward, Z is to the side, and Y is your twist. Okay, and for these spines, we're just going to be creating a real basic spine setup here. We're not going to go too elaborate. It's a good beginner place to start is with that. So going back to our side view here, we're going to go back to our create joint tool, and we're going to create our other spine joints. So we're going to have a mid back right here. I'm going to hit Y again, or that's our lower back, sorry, and then mid back right about here, and then an upper back. So again, I want to hit Y. Undo that. Okay, so my mid back, hit Y, and my upper back. So, and the reason why I kept them separated is because when you have your joint tool on and you're creating joints and you start plotting them out, it's going to automatically be orienting your joint down the joint chain. And a lot of times you really want that functionality, especially when you're working with your arms and your legs, because you want to twist around the bone that is in your body. And so this creates that, but we're going to be doing stuff where we're making sure that our controls are actually having the same orientation as our joints. And so on the spine, I want everything to be world oriented forward. Okay. But this is generally fine orientation. You don't have to do it that way. I just feel it's a little cleaner when you're working with rigs, because what's happening on the control is exactly what's happening on the joint. And sometimes there can be a little bit of a disconnect that happens with our constraints that we set up between our control and our joints. So I'll delete that. And then I'm going to take these and I'm just going to parent them down the chain. So our upper back, we'll select that, and shift, select our mid back and hit P for parent, and do the same with our mid back to our low back, hit P for parent, our low back to our root, and hit P. Okay, So while we're doing this, we want to make sure that we really start naming our joints. Naming conventions are really, really important and very crucial for everything that you do in rigging, and really for a lot of pipelines and processes. You really need naming conventions that are logical and are going to help you. If we leave these all as joint 1, 2, 3, and 4, it gets really confusing when you're starting to paint weights and you don't know what joint 12 is. And you're trying to paint weights, or you're going into your component editor, which only shows you the vertices and the joint name to assign influence on vertices. So yeah, so we're going to call this our root, and we're going to append at the end of these an underscore SK for skin. Okay, these are our skin joints that we're setting up. In a rig, we're often going to have duplicate joints, especially for our IK-FK arm setup. We'll have 3 different joint chains, and so doing an underscore SK lets us know that, hey, these are our skin joints. These are the ones that we want skin to our body, and it just helps with that organization. So we know, hey, everything with underscore SK or underscore skin, however you want to mark it so that you know, it's really for your benefit. So just have it be something that makes sense to you. Well, and hopefully makes sense to most people. So I do underscore SK, then we'll go mid back, or sorry, low back underscore SK. And then this is our mid back underscore SK. And then this is our upper back underscore SK. All right. I typically try to use names that really make sense. I don't like using spine 1, spine 2, spine 3, spine 4, spine 5. I try to shy away from that as much as I can, because again, it gets really confusing knowing, like, where's my spine 4? I don't know where that is. When we're painting weights and we're skinning and we're looking for transferring weights around, knowing what they are and where they are really helps a lot in that process. So that's why I go with a low back, mid back, upper back. Okay. So the next thing that we'll need is a pelvis. Okay. We'll select pelvis being right about here. And now we're going to be setting up, sorry about that. Now we're going to be setting up the joints for our leg. Okay. So in this case, I want to make sure they are linked together and that they are a joint chain, because I do want them oriented down the bone. Okay. So we're going to have a hip, which is going to be roughly right about here. And then we'll come down to where our knee is. So I'm considering this the middle of my knee. This goes more towards the thigh, and this down to the calf. And I want my joint right in there. Like that. That'll be my knee. Then I'll come down to where my ankle is. We're going to be right about here. And then I'm going to come down to where the ball of my foot is. So in this case, I'm going to place my joints on the ground plane, because we are going to have this foot rolling action that happens that helps keep our foot planted on the ground and still give it a lot of natural movement, being able to pivot from the ball of the foot, from the toe of the foot, doing banks, left and right, just all those foot manipulations that happen between your foot and the ground. But I like to put it on the ground. Sometimes if you got a really big foot, it is best to place it in the middle. But if you put it on the middle, you tend to get a lot of movement on these verts, and so it can be hard to make the foot really feel like it's planted and solid. But usually it's fairly minor if you wanted to keep your joints in the middle. So come down. This is going to be the ball of my foot, and then if I hit shift and I come out over here, it's going to keep it straight in line. So you'll notice I can't move it up or down. It locks it, and it's going to lock it in a 90-degree angle. So if I were to undo that and I were to hit shift and go above it, down here, and I hit shift and I go above it, it locks it over there. So we'll go ankle, ball, and the toe. Okay, and then we need to name these. So this is our pelvis underscore SK, and then we'll take that and we'll shift select our root and parent it to that. And then this is going to be our left. So capital L underscore hip underscore SK. And then this is going to be our left knee underscore SK. And then our left ankle underscore SK. And this is our left ball underscore SK. And this is our left toe underscore SK. Now, whenever you're working with joints, you'll find a lot of times you'll see joints have one joint that comes out and won't be used for skinning at all. So this joint is just being used to orient this joint right here, and it will serve a purpose and a function for our reverse foot when we get to that. But a lot of times you'll see these joints off to the end. They're never going to get any skin influence on the body, but they help point and direct and orient the joint before it. And so you'll see these ends quite often. And that's just so that the joint before it can orient towards it. Once it's oriented and it's pointing down the bone, like that, you could actually delete it and you would still get the same influence, right? That's still exactly the same, but we're going to leave it on there. It's a nice visual guide. Okay, so because we were in our profile view here for the side, and we created that, it's creating everything on that plane, so we actually need to move it over into the middle of our leg. So I'll come to the front view here, and we'll come over and we'll translate that over. So, and you'll notice like this leg isn't 100% straight. It's close, but not quite. If this were my hip right here, then this is landing way on the outside edge of the ankle, which isn't quite what we want. So I'm going to move it right about there. Okay. Okay, so we have that set up, and then just a couple notes here when you're setting up joint chains for legs and for stuff that you're planning on setting up an IK handle with. right? And IK is short for inverse kinematics, meaning that the end of our joint chain is going to control the joints before it, right? Which this is what we get when our foot plants on the ground and our hips come down, right? Or we were to move our foot around with an IK handle that would bend the knee forward. And so to get those to function properly, we have to make sure that we're giving that IK handle a preferred angle to bend at. So we always kind of move this joint so that a little forward on whatever axes that you're looking to have that knee bend. So if you did it absolutely straight and you were to go on and you were to put on an IK handle, it would bend whichever way Maya deemed the best, which is usually not the way you want it to. So we put that in. You can even go in and you could even shift and have a perfectly straight chain like that, and then just go in and move this joint forward. So if you ever need to move a joint and you don't want to move its child of that joint, then this is where knowing that the joint has no shape node comes in really handy. Because if you hit your insert key, okay, this takes you to your pivot point of your object. And normally you can move this around and it won't affect your object at all. But because the joint has no shape node, it's going to move the joint. So when I move it over, it's moving just this without moving the ankle. Whereas if I were to come out and hit my insert again, so I'm out of my pivot and I move it, my child joint moves with it. So if we were to create a straight joint chain like this, then all you'd have to do is hit insert. You just need a small little variation, right? It could be just that much of a movement forward, and that's all the IK handle needs to know that the knee needs to bend in this direction. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so to get out of pivot mode, you got to hit insert again, and we'll get back to our regular transform manipulator here. So don't need that joint chain, so we're going to delete it. Okay, and we're going to parent our left hip to our pelvis. So we'll hit P, and now everything's part of that joint chain. Okay, once we have created the left side, we can use our mirror joint function to mirror that over and get those joints in the exact same position that is on our left side over on our right side. So the first time that you do this and you set this up, I really recommend going up to your skeleton and going to the option box of the mirror joints. Open that up, okay, because you're probably going to have different settings. If I were to reset these settings, it's going to mirror across the XY axis, which means that so X is going to the side and Y is going up. So if there were a plane on that or a sheet of paper going this way, that's where it's dividing. So it would divide this way. So if I were to mirror it just like this and I hit apply, you'll see it just flipped it exactly backwards. So, which is not what we want. Oh, undid too much there. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go in, we want to be on the Y axis and the Z. So it's on this plane, bisecting our character, right? So now it's going to mirror it over the way that we are thinking. So, and then what we want to do is we've named these with an L underscore hip, L underscore knee, right? So we're going to, there's an option here for replace names for duplicated joints, okay? So we're going to have it search for an L underscore, and we're going to replace that with an R underscore. And the reason why we do L underscore and R underscore is because we don't want it to be confused. Because if we were to just do, look for just capital L and replace with a capital R, then anytime it found a capital L, it would replace it. So our low back, it would say, oh, there's a capital L in there, so I'm going to replace that with an R, and it's going to change the name to row back instead of low back. And that's not really what we're wanting. We just want it to replace exactly that one part. So select that there. You have two mirror function options. You have behavior and you have orientation. So behavior, if you hit apply, it's going to do this. And you can see what it does if you select both of them and you hit your translate. And if you go to your tool settings here, you can see what type of translation you're using for your transform tool. And right now it's going along normals. Okay, just fine. So if we move it, it's going to move exactly the same way as the other one. Okay, if we rotate, it starts flipping that. Okay, and this is pretty natural. It's kind of what you're looking for when you're animating, right? So those I'm rotating one way, but they're going the opposite. Okay, so you're mirroring their behavior. Okay, and it will be like that all the way down the line. So if we undo that, okay, and we change it to orientation, whoops, there we go, and I hit apply, okay, this is what you're going to get. Okay, get that. They're going to move together. There's no mirroring that happens until you, and then all your translation is all happening the same. So we're going to stick with behavior and hit apply. And now we've got those joint chains, and because we've named them already on the left side, we got the names for free on the right side. So that is awesome. Okay, we're going to go up now. We've got our upper back right here. And now we're going to come to our front view briefly. Okay, and we're going to be looking at our clavicle. Okay, the clavicle is right here, and it is responsible for our shoulder shrugs, for rolling our shoulders forward, rolling them back. That's all happening on the clavicle here. So and your clavicle pivots a lot closer to the center of your body than you would think. So we'll go back to our joint tool. We'll place our clavicle, we'll say right about here, and we're going to call that our left clavicle underscore SK. Right? You'll notice I'm trying to name these as I go, so that I don't have a huge task of going through and naming them all at the end. So, and then I'm going to parent that to the upper back. You know, if you're not happy with this, again, just use that insert key if that position isn't the way that you want it. Hit W for your translate tool and hit insert, and then you can move that up and it won't affect your placement of the clavicle if you want it higher. Hit insert to get out of that. Okay, so we have our left clavicle. Now we want our arm. Okay, so in this case, we're going to go to our top view. I'm going to come in here, and same thing. We're going to have an IK in our arm, and so we want to make sure that it has a bend, right? So we don't want 3 joints straight in a line. We want a slight bend, so the IK, when we put it in, knows how to bend. Okay, so we're going to go our shoulder, and it's really hard to see here because there's so much geometry that's happening. So I'm actually going to switch views, and I'm going to come to the front, and I'm going to say, okay, here's my wrist, my shoulder, I'm going to say is about here. Okay, and then I'm going to come to the top again, and actually I'm going to move that joint back a little. About there. Okay, and then if I hit my G key, it will go back to that same tool. And if you have exited out and you want to continue a joint chain, you just click the joint that you had before, or wherever you want it to connect, and it tells the joint tool to connect this joint chain to that first joint. So even though I exited out and I came back, I can still create a joint chain that comes off of that shoulder joint. So I'm going to put in my elbow joint, my wrist, and then I'm going to have another joint off of my wrist come out to basically like my fingertip or the base of my hand right in here. And right, this joint that I'm placing is just so I can orient this wrist off of this joint. I'm not actually using it for much of anything else. It's just so that it's pointing down the joint of that other one, and F to frame that. Come in and I can see that it's pointing this way, so my wrist is going to bend correctly. Okay, so now I've created this, and I'm looking and I've kind of noticed that, hey, this wrist joint, maybe this isn't quite 100% the T-pose that I need, so I'm going to move that up just so that this joint is in the proper place. Okay, now once you have your joints oriented, and you don't want to mess them up, okay? If you move any of the joints down the joint chain, it will throw off the orientation, right? Because we want this behavior. We want to be able to rotate our joint right here, and we're rotating, and you'll notice that the actual position of the first child joint under it stays in exactly the same spot, right? It's not moving. It's rotating, and its child is moving off, but not the elbow, right? And that's the functionality that we're really looking for, okay? And then same with our elbow. If we rotate that, it's going there. Okay, so if you aren't happy with the placement of your elbow or your wrist, and you do want to change it, you go in, you hit insert, or you want to move it with its child, so you move it up. That's going to mess up its parent's orientation. So now if I were to go and I were to rotate, you'll notice that the position of the wrist is moving. Okay, so it's not a huge deal. There is a joint orient tool that will reorient it, but I really like the way Maya typically orients joints when you're creating them. So I try to avoid that as much as I can, but it's not always unavoidable. So if that does happen, you do have an orient joint tool underneath your skeleton. You have orient joint right here, you could orient it to the world. So like these joints all are. Or you can orient it with the primary axis being X, meaning it's going to point the axis down the bone. That points down the bone is the X-axis. And your secondary axis is your Y-axis. And the secondary axis world orientation is Y. So meaning Y is going to be pointing up when you do that. And you can see that right here. You can see Y is pointing up right here. And that's pretty default there. But if you were to change that, and you were to say I want Z up, you can hit apply, and let's make sure we're on object, and now my Z is pointing up. Oh, except that it's actually translating Y. So let's do secondary axis Z. Okay. Okay, so each of these just gives you slightly different functionality. So, to object. So, but yeah, typically secondary axis Y, world orientation Y, and this has an option to orient the children of selected joints, so it's going to do the same thing all the way down the line. We can hit apply. Okay. And there we are. Oriented. Again, we have our Z facing back. Yeah, that's what it's actually doing. Okay. All right. So yeah, this is typically what you're wanting to do is your X, Y, Y for your orient joint. But if your joint was ever oriented really funny and really weird, your Y wasn't pointing up, it was pointing sideways, you can manually change that, okay? The way that you do that is, one, you have to be in the object mode for your rotation tool, so this manipulator. And I'm getting to these by just holding down the hotkey for each of these. So rotation is E, so holding that and then just clicking, just a normal click, and it brings up this marking menu that you can change it to object, world, gimbal. So we'll keep it an object. And then if you hit your insert key, so not only will this move the pivot, it will actually move your local rotation axes. And that's what this is. So if I were to go like this, and I wanted my Y pointing up, like that, and I can rotate it around. Then if I hit insert again, it goes back out. It's made that. So my Y is going this way. And then hit insert, I could change my Z so then it would mess up my translate X. Right? Hit insert, and you can see how it's pointing off. Right? So that's how you can manually change it. In older versions of Maya, in order to manually change it, you'd have to go into component mode, going F8, and then this little question mark up here in your component masks, you can click on that, and there's a local rotation axis, and then you can select it like this, and switch to object, and you can manipulate it here. Okay, and move it around and get your own orient that you're looking for on your joints. So, and then just go back to F8, come back out, and you are there. So 2018, you can only do it through the manipulator when you hit the insert key. But 2017 allows you to use both options, the old and the new. So it's kind of nice that now it's just the insert key and you have access to your local rotation axes. Okay, all right, so we have this, and we need to name these. Okay, so this is left shoulder underscore SK. And then this is our left elbow underscore SK. And then this is our left underscore wrist underscore SK. And then this one I'm just simply going to name left wrist underscore end. Okay, it's not a skin joint, it's just an end joint for orientation. So I will do that. The other thing that we want to look for is for a twist joint in our forearm. So, right, because what's actually happening in our forearm is we have our radial and ulna bones. I think I said that right, whatever. And those are, when we're twisting our wrist, it's actually twisting those two bones around the wrist, which causes all this flesh to actually be rotating all the way down the forearm. And so to help mimic that, we're going to add another joint here. And the way that we can add a joint, we don't, I didn't add it right at first because I wanted to make sure that I kept this same axis in our joints. So what we can do is there's an insert joint tool. So if you go to skeleton, there's your insert joint, and you just click on it, you click the parent joint of where you're wanting to put it, and then you just slide it down. You just click and hold, and you just drag it back and forth. What this does is it allows you to add a joint in there. It doesn't change the orientation of the parent joint, and it keeps it in line. And so we'll place it right about there. Okay, so now this is oriented the same as, I'll change that over to gimbal. This is oriented the same as the elbow joint, and it's down the bone. Okay, so we will rename that just the left forearm underscore SK. Okay. And then we're going to parent that chain to our clavicle. Okay. And then I'm going to select the clavicle and we're going to mirror the joints. Now that I've set up all of those settings, every time I click this, those same settings will apply. So I click it, it's changed the name to the right underscore clavicle instead of the left, and it's done that all the way down the line. Okay. One thing to note and to understand about joint mirroring is that it's mirroring off of the parent of the joint. Okay, so in this case, we mirrored it here, and the parent of the joint was our upper back, right? So it's mirroring it off of this position, and the upper back is at a translate X of 0, okay? It's right in the middle, so it gives us exactly the mirroring that we're thinking. If I were to just take my left shoulder and I were to mirror it, its parent is the clavicle. The clavicle is offset, meaning that once I click that, it has created this other joint chain, this right shoulder here, and it is offset. It is not truly being mirrored over the x-axis. And that's because its parent joint is what it was based off of. So I'll delete that. So if this was unparented, so if I hit Shift-P to unparent that, and I were to do it, now it's a child of the world. And the world is at 0, 0, 0. Right? So if I hit that again, boom, it places it in the proper place, names it correctly, and then I would just have to create the clavicle and put that in. So undo that. Okay, so that's something that's good to know and to understand with that mirroring tool, is that it's going to mirror it based off of its parent. Okay, its parent is what it is calculating that X position from. Okay, so now we have that. We're going to come we're going to go back here to the side view. There we go. And we're going to put in the joints. So back to our create joint tool here, and we need our neck joint. Okay. And then I want to keep this at world orientation. So I'm just going to hit Y, and then my head is going to be rotating right around here. So place that there, and then I'll just hit Shift for an end joint there, and there we go. Okay, so I need to parent the head joint to the neck joint, and I need to name them all. So this is my neck underscore SK. This is my head underscore SK. And this is just my head end. Okay. And then the other thing we're going to add while we're here is we'll go back to our joint tool. And we need our jaw. Okay, so our jaw is going to hinge, back in this area right here. Place my jaw right about here. And then I'm just going to create a couple extra joints just for visualization of the jaw, so I have kind of an idea of how it's going to rotate everything. So, and where my jawline is. So I'll hit Shift and drop a joint down there, and then another joint there. Okay. Now you'll notice that the joint sizes for these are getting kind of big when you're up close. If you ever need to change your joint size, they're way too big or they're teeny, teeny, tiny, what you do is you go up to Display, and you go to Animation, and underneath that animation menu, there's a joint size. So you just open that up, and this will scale all of your joints up or down, right, without actually changing anything. So I can make those a little bit smaller. If you want to change just one joint individually, they have an attribute for radius, and that will change just them. So if I change that from 0.5, I could go to 1, and it makes that jaw joint way bigger now. So it doesn't mess with its children. So it's just a visual thing. It doesn't do anything. The place where it's pivoting off of is this center point right here. So no matter how big I make it or how small I make it, it doesn't matter. It's still pivoting in the same spot. It's really just a visual aid for you so you can see where it's at. So, okay, we need to name this. This is our jaw underscore SK. This is just our jaw line, right? And this is our jaw end, right? They're just there for visualization. You don't actually need them at all. And then I'm just going to select that, shift select my head, and hit P for parent. Yay! Okay. And okay, and come out of that. Okay, I've got my neck joint. I'm going to parent that to my upper back. Okay. All right, and we've got just about everything that we need. We still need joints for, excuse me. We still need joints for our fingers and our eyes, eyelids, and we're going to do some for our hair as well. Okay, so the hands here are a little tricky because they're kind of in this relaxed position. They're not all straight out. They're all partially cupped. And so it's going to be really hard to place these in a nice line that goes in the direction that the fingers are going. And so what we're going to do is we're going to place the joints on the mesh itself and kind of follow its geometry for placing our joints. So the way that we do that is we're going to make our object live, right? Because in this view, in our perspective view, as I showed earlier, if I try placing joints, it's going to land on the grid. Okay? And we don't want that. We want to place these joints. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this object a live object. So the way that you do it, you have all these snapping options, and this last option is making a surface live. Consider it like the world in gravity. Like everything you hold, you know, if you pick up a cup and you drop it, it's immediately going to go and fall straight to the world, right? Just fall straight down, it hits the ground, it breaks. And so that's the same concept basically, is that whatever you place once you've made something live is going to stick to that object. So if I select my Tesla body here and I go up and I select that, my Tesla body is live. It turns our mesh green, and up here in the text field it says Tesla body. Okay, so what this does is if I go to my joint tool and I click, it's sticking to the model. Wherever I take it, it is sticking to that model, and it doesn't let me pull off of that. Okay, so it can really handy for placing joints, especially things like these fingers where we don't have a really good line to work off of, right? We can't go into our side view because they're slightly coming forward. We can't go to our top view because they're slightly pointing down, and so on and so forth. So we're going to do it live here, and we're just going to keep that joint on there. Okay, and then I'll come to my next knuckle. Ooh, man. My controls are getting all weird here. Hold on a second. There we go. Okay. So I'll place this knuckle about here. And then I have a tip finger that I'll say is right about here. And then I just want to orient this joint forward, so I'm just going to add one more joint right here. Okay. So now they're all oriented. Okay. They're sitting on the model itself. And yeah, and so they're kind of, they've got the right position, everything that I'm kind of looking for, but obviously I want it in the middle of my model. So what I'm going to do is I can leave my object live, and if I just go to my move tool here, I can select, and this is going to break that live connection that it has. So I can move that over inside of my finger. So, and it's not quite right. You know, as you can tell, it's kind of going off center there. So I'm going to rotate it and get it in there. Go. So that it is going down the finger. But you'll notice now I have rotation on my X, Y, and Z, and I absolutely want to avoid any of that. So I'm going to go up to Modify, and I'm going to go to my Freeze Transformation. So the option box will give you options to do Translate, Rotate, and Scale. This is default, and that is exactly what we want. We hit Apply. On joints, it's not going to do anything to the Translate X, Y, and Z. That is basically a baked-in value. But it is going to change my rotate X, Y, and Z back to 0. That is exactly what I want. I want my X, Y, and Z on my joints to be zeroed out. You always want that to be the case. So if you need to move your joint chain and you need to get them all in line, as opposed to going in and moving the child joints, which will, one, mess up your joint orientation, but yeah, which isn't really what you want, and it can mess up the line, right? We've got a nice clean line going down, and it may not be straight anymore once we start moving those. So if you rotate the whole joint chain, you can get it in place, everything's lined up. That's kind of how we want it. Maybe we want it rotated just a little bit up, so it's a little more in the middle. And then again, go back to Modify and freeze those transforms. So we'll get rid of that X, Y, and Z. Okay. So we're going to name these. This is going to be our left pointer knuckle. Excuse me. Underscore SK. And we'll come down. And this is going to be our left underscore mid knuckle. We'll just call it left underscore mid pointer underscore SK. And then we'll come down and do our left tip pointer underscore SK. Just like that. Okay. Oh, and I mixed up my naming. So the first one is right. Left pointer, knuckle, skin, And then I need to change these so that they are left pointer mid underscore, and go. And change this to be left pointer underscore tip underscore SK. Okay. The reason why we're doing that is because we're trying to define this by the most general to specific, right? So if we were to search for everything on our left side, we could do a search for L underscore, and that would pull up everything, right? So L underscore becomes the very first thing that we have. And then if we're like, oh, I want just my left pointer finger, then we can do L underscore pointer, and that would find everything, all the joints on our left pointer finger. Whereas if I had left it left tip pointer, then I wouldn't be able to just go left underscore pointer, search and find, and it would find all of those joints. It would miss those joints. So yeah, so that's kind of the methodology behind those. So you again want to do the same thing with your other fingers, and you want to make sure that when you're rotating it, it's rotating pretty naturally. So you could take this joint chain and you could duplicate it and move it over. Oh, I'm live still, so I'm going to take the live off. There we go. And then I can move that over. I can rotate it into position. This. And then if you do need to move your joint chain, because obviously my middle finger is longer than my pointer finger, and so I need my knuckle, my mid knuckle, to be further forward, along with the tip needs to be forward too. So if you do have to move them, then try to move them on your x-axis so it doesn't mess up your joint orientation of the parent. So we're going to freeze the transforms on that. I just have a button here that I use. It freezes transforms, and then I'll rotate it down just a touch. Okay, and freeze the transforms again. So my X, Y, and Z are 0. And then I want to move this. I'm going to move it on my X-axis to where that mid-knuckle is, about there. And then that kind of places the tip in, yeah, pretty good spot. So, and then I think I might rotate a little too much. So this joint, rotate it down. Okay, and then I would go through and rename all this. I'm not going to go through all the fingers. It's something that you each can do. And then the thumb will have the same thing. It will have a joint up here and kind of the fleshy part of the thumb. It still has 3 joints, right? And they're just in different placements. So there will be a joint that's back here, closer to the wrist, a joint right here, and then the tip of our thumb joint is right here. So, and you can use that same methodology to place that. It would be the same methodology that I use to place the joints for the hair by making my object live. And then placing my joints along the side, 4 or 5 joints. And with hair, tails, things like that, I know I said I like to avoid naming things 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but you can't always avoid it. I can't have 6 tail joints and say this is the base, mid, tail joint, and the next one is the mid, base, tail joint, and then the next one is the mid. Yeah, it gets really confusing, right? And that's not the point. I'm trying to avoid confusion as much as possible. Excuse me. So, yeah, I'll place 4 or 5 joints in the hair, and they'll just be hair 01, hair 02, hair 03, hair 04, underscore SK. And yeah, it's fine. It's a small area that you're covering. It's not going to be too bad. But for the last thing I kind of wanted to go over was joints for the eyes. Okay. My computer's wigging out here. Okay. So the eyes in this model are separate meshes, which is good, but eyeballs are round, and we need a joint to be right in the middle of our eyeball. Okay, and we convert snap by going V and placing a joint, and that would get us right in the front of the eye, but there is no point in the middle of the eye. So the question becomes, how do we get a joint to be placed in the center of an object? Okay, so, and it's fairly simple, and it's a really great trick to use. So what we're going to do is, this is a sphere. It's a perfectly round object, our eye. So the first thing we want to do is we want to check where our pivot point is. We're going to frame that. If we hit W, it's a good way to know where your pivot point is by hitting W. Hold on a second. My computer is wigging out. 1 second. Okay, I apologize for that. Looks like Maya was giving me a few issues here. Okay, so getting a joint placed in the middle of an object. Okay, so what we want to do is we are going to have our eye selected here, and then doing it again. No! There we go. Okay. All right, so we have our eye selected here, And if we go underneath Modify, there is underneath Pivot, there's a Center Pivot Object option. So we click that, and that makes sure that our pivot point is now centered in the middle. Okay, so we need a joint to go right to the middle of that eye, right to where that pivot point is. So now that we know our eyeball is round and our pivot point is centered, so it's right in the middle of that object. And since it's round, the middle is its center. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a joint. So we'll throw a joint there, and we will just call that our left eye underscore SK. Right? And then what we're going to do is we are going to use a parent constraint. Okay, now a parent constraint works just like you were parenting an object to another object, except that it doesn't become part of its hierarchy. What it also does is it locks out all of its translation and rotation. You cannot control it once something has been constrained. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our eye, and we're going to shift select that eye joint. Okay, because the eye briefly is going to be controlling our joint. Okay, and so when we're setting up a constraint, we need to make sure that we select the controller first and then the thing being controlled second, which is opposite of parenting. Right? Parenting, we normally select the child and then we shift select the parent and hit P, and it parents that object. Well, with constraining, it's opposite. We select the thing that will control or be the parent, and then we shift select the thing being controlled or the child. So now that we have those selected, underneath our rigging menu, we can go to the option Constrain, and we're going to go to the option box for the parent constraint. Now the default is for the parent constraint to maintain offset. That means wherever this object is, if it's not right where it is, it's going to keep it there, and it's just going to act like a child right where it's at. Now if we turn that off, so maintain offset is not on, what it's going to do is it's going to snap this object. It's going to force it to move to that eye. So we hit apply, and there it is. It is right in the center of the eye, which is exactly the placement we were wanting. Okay, but we'll notice that it's got these blue channels here, and that tells us that there is a constraint on that joint. Okay, and we really don't want that. We wanted the placement that the parent constraint gave us, but we don't want to lock out we don't want our eyeball controlling the joint that our eyeball is going to be skinned to. So in our outliner, we can go to our left eye underscore skin, and we can see here's our parent constraint node. And we can select that and just hit delete. And now it is deleted, it is gone, we are happy. Yay! Okay, so now that we have that, a couple other things that we want to get at that same pivot point is our eyelids. Right? Our eyelids are gliding over our eyeballs. And so their pivot point will also be at the center of the eye. So as opposed to going through that whole process again, we're just going to duplicate. So Control D twice. Okay? And we're going to call, and because they're all right on top of each other, we want to make things really easy to select. We're going to go to our first one, our first copy of that joint, and we're going to rename it left upper eyelid underscore SK. SK. And we're going to change its radius to be 1. And then we're going to go to the other joint, and we're going to name that the left low eyelid underscore SK. And we're going to make this radius be 0.3. So now we can see, hey, we have 3 different joints. They all have the same pivot point, and we've just made them slightly bigger or smaller so that we can quickly select them and see them. Whereas if they were all the same radius, we'd be selecting, it would be really hard to tell which one we were grabbing. So we're going to select all 3 of these, and we're going to shift select our head joint, and we're going to parent those to that. Okay, and now that we have those, we can copy those over because we need a right side for each of those as well. So we're just going to go to our mirror joint. We'll mirror that one. And then mirror this one, our upper eyelid, and zoom in a little and grab that one and mirror that. Perfect. Okay. So we have those. The other thing we probably want to do is select our model again. And we're going to make it live right here. And we're going to create 3 more joints. So we'll create the mid one. We'll just hit Y. And so we'll have an inner eyebrow, mid eyebrow, and an outer eyebrow. Okay, and we're going to name all these exactly that. Left inner eyebrow underscore SK, and then left mid eyebrow underscore SK, and left outer eyebrow underscore SK. Perfect, and then we'll take each of these and we will parent them to the head joint as well. Shift selecting and hitting P. We'll wait for that. There it goes. And now we can select each of those and we can mirror the joint. To mirror it, now that we've called that, we can just hit G to recall it each time. All right, that has renamed that. Okay, and then we can make those the joints here. Like that, and you'll notice that put it way off. Okay, so that isn't actually going to orient our joint the way that we want it to go. So that top joint and move it into place. And take that around, take this, and that. Moved it the wrong way. Oh, yes, as soon as I grabbed it, since my object is live, it's moving it to the top. I don't want that. So we'll turn the live object off and get this positioned. Okay, and then once those are in place, I've rotated around a bunch, so I need to freeze my transforms. Again, that's under Modify and Freeze Transforms. Freeze Transformations. Okay, still need to orient this last joint, so I will select this. Go, and then I can just vert snap by holding V to that tip. There we go, and hit enter. So pretty straight. Tip might be just a little bit off, so we'll move that and then we'll orient the joint, and that should give us the orientation that we're looking for. Like that. Okay. Go here and go back to our skeleton and orient joint, and that has pointed it down. And then we just want to take a look at those joints again, and go. You can see it's a little skiwampus. I like my rotation to go the way that feels the most natural. And so right now it's going to be rotating off to the side in kind of weird ways. So I'm going to hit my insert key and I'm going to rotate that back up, back out, and that looks a lot better, but I need to do it for each of my joints here. So this is a case where, you know, I need to make that joint orientation very specific, that the tool isn't going to give me automatically, and that the joint orient tool isn't going to give me automatically either. So change that. Go. And you'll notice coming down that where the Y is and where the Z rotation is, they start flipping. And this happens sometimes with joint chains. And so you just have to really force them to do exactly what you want. So in this case, we're making our Y point up. And we'll do the same with this one. We'll make our Y point up, out. And we'll make sure this one's doing the same thing. So see, our Y is pointing other crazy way. Okay, so now those joints are oriented. A little bit better. There we go. Those are not orienting the way that we want. So we're going to go into component mode, hitting F8, and making sure that we can select our local rotation axes. And we're going to rotate those. And remember, we're going to switch this over to object because it does not like go. This one. We want the Y coming up. Right. And when I'm rotating these local rotation axes, I'm really only doing it on one axis around that X, because I do not want to lose that down the joint orientation that I have. Right? I'm just lining up my Y and Z axes, which are being based off of the X axis. So I can move that to my heart's content, and it won't ruin that down the joint line. Okay. Insert, or sorry, come back out, hit F8, so we're back to object mode, and we're oriented much better. We're going to name these hair 01 underscore SK, and go down the line hair 02 underscore SK, hair 03 underscore SK, and down hair 04 underscore SK. And the last one is just the hair underscore end. Okay. Oh, and I forgot, I need to add left on there. So I will go up to modify, and there's a prefix hierarchy name. So I can select the top of that, and I can just hit L underscore, and it's going to put that at the beginning of all of those. So I don't have to do it individually. Okay, so I will select the head, parent that, and then I will mirror that over. Okay. That pretty much gives us all the joints that we were looking for. Hopefully you're saving often throughout this, but go. Okay. Yes. Hopefully you saved often. In the next one, we're gonna take this skeleton that we just created. We're gonna attach it to our model, and we're going to start the fun process of painting weights. Hooray! All right, I hope this went well. Good luck getting the rest of your finger joints all in, and I'll continue this on the next tutorial, and we'll be going over painting weights. Thanks.